On March 1, 2000, a racially motivated shooting spree occurred in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, when 39-year-old Ronald Taylor, a black man who harbored anti-white and anti-Semitic ideologies, shot and killed 3 people and wounded 2 others within an 8-block radius, primarily at local Burger King and McDonald's restaurants. Hours later, Taylor surrendered to police and was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death in 2001. He was incarcerated at SCI Phoenix in eastern Pennsylvania until his death in 2024. Details. Shooting begins. At about 9 a.m. on March 1, 2000, 2 maintenance workers, John DeWitt and 55-year-old John Kroll, arrived at the apartment of 39-year-old Ronald Taylor to replace his door. When Taylor answered the door, he began taunting them with insults about their being white, according to DeWitt, who claimed Taylor said, "You white, racist pig." Despite the harassment, DeWitt and Kroll started their work. Around 10:30 a.m., after removing the old door, DeWitt and Kroll began installing the new one, while Taylor continued to harass them. Eventually, DeWitt told Taylor, "Why don't you just shut up?" Taylor responded with, "You're dead." As the job neared completion, a woman downstairs called up asking if one of the maintenance workers could help her with a locked bedroom door. DeWitt agreed and walked downstairs, leaving Kroll to finish the job. Kroll then went downstairs to meet a coworker named Andrew Williams. At about 11:15 a.m., Taylor grabbed his .22 caliber revolver and set his apartment couch on fire. Armed with the gun, he confronted Kroll and Williams downstairs and reportedly said, "I don't like white people," before shooting Kroll in the neck. Williams rushed to Kroll's side, but Taylor did not shoot Williams, likely because Williams was black. Instead, Taylor demanded to know where DeWitt was. DeWitt, who was in the parking lot putting tools away, saw Taylor with a gun and took cover. Minutes later, DeWitt saw Williams covered in blood, carrying Kroll in his arms. Taylor was not in sight, so DeWitt rushed over to Williams and asked what happened. Williams informed DeWitt that Taylor had shot Kroll and was looking for him. DeWitt and Williams then placed Kroll in the back of the employee pickup truck and drove to Western Pennsylvania Hospital. Police and firefighters were contacted and rushed to Taylor's apartment, but by that time, Taylor had fled. About 5 minutes later, Taylor walked 2 blocks to a Burger King at Penn and Pitt Avenues, where he fatally shot 71-year-old Joseph Healy, a former PNC Bank employee and priest. Shortly afterward, Taylor approached a McDonald's and fired multiple shots at the van of 56-year-old Richard Klinger, who was waiting in the drive-thru. Some shots struck Klinger, and his stepdaughter, Cindy Zambo, ran to a nearby Dunkin' Donuts to alert people about her father being shot. Meanwhile, Taylor entered the McDonald's and shot the manager, 25-year-old Stephen Bostard. Taylor then returned to the parking lot and shot 20-year-old Emil Sanielevisi, who was waiting to pick up food. Sanielevisi later died, while Klinger and Bostard survived after being treated at UPMC. At 11:51 a.m., Kroll, who was awaiting surgery, died from his bullet wound. Shooting ends. At around 12 p.m., police cornered Taylor at a residential building, where he had taken refuge in an empty room. Sergeant John Fisher began communicating with Taylor and pleaded with him to surrender. Taylor told the officer that he was going to commit suicide because he did not want his mother to see him in jail. After 2 hours, Fisher was able to convince Taylor to surrender, and at around 2:15 p.m., Taylor handed over his gun and was arrested. Victims: killed, Emil Sanielevisi, 20. John Kroll, 55. Joseph Healy, 71. Injured: Stephen Bostard, 25. Richard Klinger, 56. Perpetrator: Ronald Taylor, September 30, 1960 to April 2, 2024. The shooter had no prior criminal record. Taylor grew up in the predominantly African-American Hill District of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As a child, he was diagnosed with asthma. He attended Fifth Avenue High School until it closed in 1976 and then attended Lesh Education Center until dropping out. At the time of the shooting spree, Taylor lived in the Woodside Garden Apartments and was unemployed, relying on supplemental security income and food stamp benefits totaling between $600 and $700 a month. In a search of Taylor's apartment, police found writings that indicated his anti-white beliefs, as well as anti-Semitic writings including excerpts such as "Big Thumbs Up to Hitler." Taylor had written a suicide note, which investigators found after the shooting. The note read, "I'm sorry, Mother, for taking my own life with your gun that I sneaked for the second time in 2 years. Try to understand when a person is physically suffering for a long time and I'm treated by racist, biased doctors and nurses who so often give me generic, cheap medication that is ineffective and causes return visits to emergency rooms. Frustration so often sets in. I get fed up with doctors treating Black patients differently from whites in terms of unfairness, unequally, and like dirt. Jesus Christ made a very costly mistake putting white people on the face of the earth. I'll see all of my enemies in hell. Ha, 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 ha." Friends of Taylor were stunned by the shootings. David Ellis, an acquaintance of Taylor, said that Taylor never caused any trouble I knew of. They were also shocked by the allegations of Taylor being racist. Neighbors described Taylor as quiet and someone who didn't start any trouble. Taylor rarely interacted with his family and spent a significant amount of time in isolation. He had a history of mental illness. Dr. Horacio Fabrega, who testified for Taylor's defense, described him as delusional and noted that Taylor had once burned an image of Jesus Christ under the belief that God had turned bad. Taylor had stolen the revolver used in the shootings from his mother, who had purchased it in 1982. Reactions. In the wake of the shooting, President Bill Clinton expressed sorrow for the victims' families, stating, "We owe the families of the victims, the communities, our prayers, and the best wishes." Clinton used the case as an example of why stricter gun laws should be implemented. "We don't know all the facts yet, but it was a bad situation." These incidents, particularly the one yesterday in Michigan, call on us to recognize the fact that we simply haven't done everything we can to keep guns away from criminals and children. Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge expressed his sorrow, stating, "Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims, their families, and the entire Wilkinsburg community." Wilkinsburg Mayor Wilbert Young held multiple vigils the night after the shooting to honor the victims. Legal proceedings. In April 2000, Allegheny County Judge Jeffrey A. Manning ruled Ronald Taylor incompetent to stand trial, despite a psychiatrist's finding that he was competent. The prosecution requested another psychiatric evaluation after a psychiatrist hired by Taylor's defense claimed he suffered from schizophrenia. Following an additional evaluation by Dr. Michael Wellner, Taylor was ruled competent, and in September, prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. In April 2001, Taylor was transferred to the Allegheny County Jail in downtown Pittsburgh to await trial, which began on November 1st. Taylor pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, citing years of mental illness. Prosecutors argued that Taylor was not as mentally unwell as he claimed and was attempting to shift blame away from himself. Dr. Horacio Fabrega testified that on the day of the shooting, Taylor was under significant stress, including fears about his lease not being renewed. Fabrega also testified that Taylor believed there was a conspiracy against Black people and other minorities, which he described as a psychotic storm. Fabrega acknowledged that Taylor was aware of the severity of his actions, but believed they were justified under his perceived circumstances. On November 8, Taylor was convicted on 46 criminal charges, 3 counts of first-degree murder, 9 counts of aggravated assault, 4 counts of terroristic threats, 2 counts of unlawful restraint, 4 counts of simple assault, 16 counts of reckless endangerment, 1 count of arson, 1 count of catastrophe, 1 count of risking a catastrophe, 1 count of carrying a gun without a license, and 1 count of perpetrating a hate crime. The jury was then tasked with deciding whether Taylor should be sentenced to death or to life in prison. To influence the jury away from the death penalty, the defense presented testimony from Taylor's family. Taylor's brother Charles testified that their father had abused and threatened young Ronald, causing emotional trauma that lingered into adulthood. Their mother, Shirley, testified that Ron is not a racist. I did not raise my children to hate white people, and described her son as having suffered in social situations and being affected by the noise around him. 2 jurors were reportedly seen crying during this testimony. The defense argued several mitigating factors, including Taylor's lack of a criminal record and his mental health issues. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury unanimously decided to sentence Taylor to death. Taylor showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He was formally sentenced to death on January 11, 2002. Judge Lawrence O'Toole rejected the defense's request to overturn the jury's verdict based on Taylor's mental health. Aftermath. A month after Taylor's shooting spree, a white man named Richard Baumhammers committed a racially motivated shooting spree in Pittsburgh, killing 5 minorities. Due to the close timing, location, and similarities between the cases, media outlets frequently compared Taylor and Baumhammers. Baumhammers' father, who opposed the death penalty, attended Taylor's trial. In 2005, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court upheld Taylor's death sentence and denied a new trial. In January 2006, Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell signed a death warrant ordering Taylor's execution on February 28, 2006, by lethal injection. The execution was later halted for unknown reasons. Taylor was incarcerated at State Correctional Institution, Phoenix. On April 2, 2024, he died of natural causes at age 63. Kroll's widow expressed relief at the news but noted that Taylor's death ultimately did not change anything.